So I am here with my good friend Dax Swanson. Dax, you and I have talked a lot over the years, and a few times we've recorded our conversations on Zoom here. And we talked briefly over the phone yesterday, and we both decided this would be a good idea to maybe have a conversation about what's happening in our country, in our world, and not just in our world out there, but also in our world, in our own hearts and minds, and the people that we interact with. You have a congregation that you're ministering to. I have a congregation down here in Olympia I'm ministering to, and people are really hurting right now. People are struggling deeply with what's happening in our country, and everyone's feeling, I think, afraid and insecure. I think everyone has feelings of anger as well. And so I thought maybe we could just think out loud together, Dax. We're not going to be real rehearsed here. Just kind of think out loud. Two pastors, two guys trying to make sense of things, and two guys who care about people and care about the truth, care about the gospel, and want to be a source of encouragement to others and a source of comfort to others. So anyway, I appreciate you coming on here, Dax. You're a good friend, man, and I'm thankful for your sharing your thoughts over the years, and you've encouraged me and helped me, and I think vice versa some. So we'll think out loud together.
Awesome.
Sound good?
Sounds great.
Okay, so it's 2021. We're not too many days in, and we are off with a bang. It's already, I hear people saying, my gosh, I almost feel like I want to go back to 2020. And in 2020, everyone was saying, hey, let's go back to 2019. So it's goes without saying, it's a really challenging time, a really sort of loaded. The atmosphere just feels heavy for me, and I think for other people that, I know for people I'm dealing with, and I'm sure for people you're dealing with. So how are you personally experiencing things, and maybe even just the news that came out on Wednesday when the Capitol in Washington, D.C. there was stormed by some radical folks? How are you experiencing these things? How are you making sense of what's going on?
Well, I don't know what making sense. We can talk about through making sense of it, but the difficulty for me right now personally is that everything hits people differently. I mean, I had yesterday several people come in counseling wise or just with questions and struggling with how our society is handling different issues on both sides.
Yeah.
And the difficulty for me personally is that it doesn't touch me as much maybe as it ought to. I think that everybody's got their own story, but my personal story is my dad died last week. So, thinking through and grieving and remembering my dad, it puts perspective on things happening 2,500 miles away that maybe don't necessarily impact me as much. And I'm not in that, but I have a heart for those in our body who really are and who have a really sensitive spirit about what's happening in our nation. So I get it and I want to help, but I think at the same time, the perspective of we all have our individual stories. And I think that does start to play in theologically to how you take this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But we'll see.
Mm-hmm. Do you think, Dax, if it weren't for the passing of your father recently, do you think you would be more affected by what's happening, or still maybe the way you're wired, it's not been something as profoundly impactful for you?
I think a lot of it is messaging. A lot of it is how much you hear. Mm-hmm. The more you hear of a slanted perspective or perspective you think is wrong, it starts to abrade your, it's almost like my dog, if you rub his fur the wrong way. I feel like people, when they start hearing things and it sets them off that this isn't unjust or not right on either side, strong opinions, and they go, wait a minute, I don't agree with that, and this is unjust. Yep. Then people start to get upset. And especially if upset is seen as systematic or in government or those things, it becomes really upsetting and hard.
Yeah.
And then fear breaks in. It's like, oh, is this horrible thing going to happen to us? Because I don't know.
Right. Yeah. See, that's where
guys in Revelation, right? Or this Revelation,
right.
Things, whatever.
Right. This is the end. Right. Right. And I'm wired a little differently than you, and I find myself preoccupied with these topics pretty often, probably for a whole lot of reasons. But I can say in my personal experience, there is a sense of fear looking down the road and saying, okay, where is this heading? Where is this political movement heading? And I have my own views, of course, and we all do. But I can definitely relate to the sense of fear, and then also along with that comes a frustration. I think, like you're saying, it's the messaging, it's the things you're hearing, it's the media, and you're inundated with those messages. But the reason it hooks us, the reason it gets us inside and gets us stirred up, is because it appeals to our sense of right and wrong. It touches our fears, what we want. I mean, for me, I could just say I love our country, and as I look back, especially prior to 2020, things were good, and I'm enjoying my family and some of the benefits of living in America in this day and age. Man, I love the country, and I hate to see it going a direction that I think is destructive. And so there's a personal level of just, hey, I like what is. I have goals for the future that require a certain form of freedom or prosperity. And so then when I feel like there are many who are opposing what I value, I'm going to be protective. It's human nature, right? To fight for what we feel as though we need to protect, and to, along with that, to condemn the other side, and to, however you want to put it, you could, to be extreme, we could say to demonize the other side. That certainly happens a lot.
But even if you don't demonize, even if you're a thinker, because we should go into what you do in each choice. What you said right there is really important, and a good question that I would have for you is, can you see the direction going a direction you think is wrong? Mm-hmm. And you get either fearful or wanting to do something to protect sort of whatever viewpoint you have. Why? Why do you want to do that? Or why do you think you can, I guess?
Yeah.
Like, what gives you the viewpoint? Because this is the same thing I was talking about someone here. Why do we think we have the power to protect anything? And why do we think we're not protected every moment by the Lord?
Right.
Or somehow, because what's sneaking into me is this idea that the Lord's given me ability to protect myself, mm-hmm. as opposed to the Lord's protecting me.
Right. And I could expand it, even say, hey, protect my family. You know, I mean, you're a dad with 2 daughters. I've got 3 daughters, and you think of, hey, what's the future going to be like for them? And is there a way to protect them from what's coming or seemingly coming? And even that's loaded with my own presuppositions. But I think that's part of it too. And neither of us would say, well, you know, que sera, sera. It doesn't. God's in control. Therefore, just unplug from it all and don't even think about it and don't take any responsibility. I mean, I think we would agree, even as American citizens, hey, we inform yourself. We have the ability to vote. That's a valuable thing that not all people have had throughout the ages. It's a great gift and benefit. So take advantage of that, you know? And so anyway, I think I know for me personally, that's where I go with it is especially regarding the future. I think of my family and my daughters, and if there's a direction that may be more of a threat to them, even though, again, if we talk about it on a spiritual level, I know, hey, look, their biggest problem is not outside of them, it's inside of them. And through Christ, God has met that need for us in terms of his forgiveness and his love and his grace and the assurance of eternal life.
Do you think that, I guess, one of the issues that comes up to me is, I get that God has met the conditions of my forgiveness, mm-hmm. and the conditions of what he's done for me with his blood and what he did for me on the cross. But everything you said there is in the past tense. And so the question is, does he have me now? Like today? Like, is God really in charge? And it's a sovereignty question, but it's particularly in light of the promises of Christ in Romans 8:28, or however you want to put those things, of saying, hey, is God really in charge now? And how much does he use me and my desires? Like, I see as a Christian and I see wrong. How much is what God's plan is to have me engage with society to change it for the better or for wherever I think it ought to go? Mm-hmm. And how much is it more passive of, I trust that because he's bigger than me, that he's got the king's heart in his hand, mm-hmm. and everything that he's doing is by God's plan, and he's got us as precious children always here, right? And my family, I'll put my family in that hand and say, he's got my kids, right? I mean, I don't really know what the best is. Do I think the best thing is that Biden is president? Do I think the best thing is that Trump is president? Well, at the end of the day, I have no idea. Right. I have positions, I know, and I'm pro-life, or I'm personally like these economic decisions, or I like this, justice for our society, or whatever I think our politicians represent. But at the end of the day, I'm little, and I really have very little wisdom about what the best overall thing is.
Right. I've thought of that many times. I might think in my mind, well, if a certain politician gets elected, then that's more apt to preserve our culture and give us a longer run at this and make things better. When in the end, I don't know. You don't know. Either one, it could be a flaming disaster, a dumpster fire. Either way, and even again, either way you go, they're humans, and historically, we've not done well.
Well, and think through it. Think through like the possibility. So you have the possibility that you elect someone that you think is very bad for the country, whoever that might be.
Mm-hmm.
Well, but then God uses that short 4-year period to awaken other people to how bad it is. Mm-hmm. And then they actually affects good change 6 years from now. I mean, the thing is, we have no everything. I read this the other day with a politician. He's like, he used to be really engaged strongly because he felt like every single decision was an urgent, life-shattering decision.
Right.
And he says, then the next 4 years, and then another earth-shattering decision. I mean, and then sometimes they go your way and sometimes they don't. But in actuality, it's not that earth-shattering.
Right. And I totally understand that. And so let me just be that guy who's struggling through that and push back and say, okay, I hear you, and I agree that these things, the way our system is set up, things change, and we can vote someone else in years from now and all of that. But the fear is we're starting to go down a direction where we may lose the freedom to be able to do that, or there may be an appearance of the ability to do that democratically, but in reality, there isn't. It's become a one-party system almost, to where it's just now it is becoming more and more big government, and you don't have a say. You think you do, but you don't even have whatever little say you thought you had. You don't even have that. And now there's going to be more and more encroachment on your personal freedoms or your religious freedoms or whatever. And so the fear is like, hey, we're going to get to a place of no return, across a line where there's no going back. And yeah, it's just a little thing, but those little decisions over time do add up, and at some point there may be, again, a point of no return. That's the fear. And to your point earlier, I get that. Well, okay, what are you going to do about it? I mean, can you ultimately stop it if it's going that direction? What is one person going to do? Are you going to try to start a new movement and lead this revolution or counter revolution or whatever? I know it's a fair question. I don't know what to say about that. But
no, and don't get me wrong, because I think that is a take on what I was saying. But what I was really getting after is that we know somebody who does have the power to change everything.
Yeah.
It's not so much that I am powerless and therefore don't try. It's no, I totally trust that I have a God who is able to do anything and who does. And I ask him, I mean, we all pray. I hope you're praying. I pray for the country all the time because I feel like how kind to my kids to have a country where there's freedom. And I want freedom. And I value the things that we have that are amazing. We have the richest society that's ever existed. We enjoy such freedom based on our ability to not have to work 9 hours a day to have one meal. And that's huge and wonderful. And we have it. And it may not last forever, but it's, to me, foolishness for people to start going down lines that are going to take away from those things. At the same time, our society is not built on scripture. I mean, capitalism is not a Bible truth. It's motivating people mostly by greed, and it works, and that's fantastic. It has great things about it, like because you're not judging the other person for what they're doing. You're just allowing them to make their choices. So there's good and bad in all these system pieces. I guess I want people to pull back into, you know what? We are so wrapped in the wonder of Christ for us that our life is fantastic because of that. And our kids' life will be too. I mean, trust Christ has them. He really does. Yeah. And this stuff don't touch you as heavy, maybe.
Yeah.
Don't engage. Absolutely. It doesn't mean that society's not important and we need to stand up for what we think the truth is. Stand. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just this underlying fear that I'm getting at.
Yeah, right. I understand that. I totally understand that. And I think about, you didn't say this earlier. I know you've experienced the loss of your dad, but not long ago you had your own brush with death. And I'm sure
Yeah.
that too can give you a fresh and healthy perspective on the fragility of life, right? And how we are small and it's okay. And Christ tells us, hey, look, take one day at a time. And that's not some divine mandate loaded with the possibility of contempt if you are worried about it. It's literally like Jesus is ministering comfort to us, even in telling us, look, you don't have to. God takes care of the flowers of the field and the birds of the air. He's going to take care of you. And that goes back to what you were saying earlier. This is God having compassion for us as we wrestle through things, and we're all churning inside, and things can easily boil over because of that. And here's a God who has mercy on us and speaks truth to us.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely true. And the idea of our proclivity is to build barns and to build structures and to build prosperity. And that all fits to me. And you're not living in today. You're not enjoying the manna God's given you today, and you should. So, I mean, the whole stop and smell the roses stuff. But bigger than that, to me, if you talk theologically, I think it's interesting to think through. It's not a gospel question. Like, it's not an issue of the proclamation of God's good news. What we're struggling over in our society right now, to me, is a law question.
Law, yep.
We're struggling about the law.
That's
because
right.
we're losing the rule of law, and
Yep.
we're in disagreement on what law is.
Yep.
And we're trying to bring motive into it, and we're trying to bring what justice really is, and to see our society so far away from the gospel, which is what they need. And now we're even because to me, what it exposes is we really are creatures of the law. Like, I need the law to affirm my viewpoint. Right. And so the law is what I'm arguing over. And there's, racial inequalities that we need to make right from many, many years ago? Are there just the ways people aren't treated rightly based on either their economic status or their color of their skin, or all these things that we're coming into? Yeah. And then the idea of, was the election fair? Or did people cheat? And really, it's a question of law, right? I mean,
absolutely.
I want justice.
That's huge.
And here comes the law, which accuses everybody.
Yeah.
But I don't want it to accuse everybody. I just wanted to accuse my opponents.
Right. The people on the other side. Absolutely. Yeah. Which is our nature. And as I've talked to people about this, I've kind of tried to separate. There's the kingdom of God and God's economy and grace and full pardon. It is not a meritocracy. It is the opposite of that. Full acceptance no matter what. And then there's life in this world, and there are laws of science, law of gravity, for example. If you're on a tall building, you jump off, you're going to fall and you're going to hurt yourself or kill yourself. At the same time, when it comes to this kingdom of this world, to your point earlier, you brought up capitalism, and I've wrestled through, and I've had people ask, was Jesus a socialist? Was Jesus a capitalist? It's like, well, it's neither, in one sense. And
not a system. Yeah.
Right, exactly. But there is the reality of human nature and the truth of human nature. And there are certain systems of governance that seemingly have worked better in harnessing the reality of human nature. And so let me just throw this out there, see what you think of it. We haven't ever talked about this before, but as I'm reading different authors and even just picked up a biography on Karl Marx and trying to understand why socialism is appealing, I'm reading when it comes to the race topic, which is closely related to this whole issue of systems of governance. But I'm reading Ibram Kendi's book, How to Be an Anti-Racist, and Robin DiAngelo's book, White Fragility. And I'm also reading Thomas Sowell, who's an African-American historian, economist, who's conservative. And have you heard him before or read anything by him? Yeah. So I'm reading other authors on the other side and wrestling through this. Okay. So I'm getting sidetracked here, but I guess my question is, and well, maybe I'll say it this way. What I've been experiencing doing with people is saying, look, I think when it comes to how do we understand a system of governance and what seems to work best, I think it's important to take into consideration how are humans wired and what can happen. I mean, I met with a friend of mine who's a leader in the community. He has an important position in the school district here yesterday. He's a believer. I know his pastor and goes to a different church, but know his pastor. And we were talking through, because there's all this equity talk that's now being shared in the schools, and it's clearly politically motivated. There's a definite slant to it politically, and you can't escape that. And so we're talking through that. And in one sense, his question to me was kind of like, well, where do you fear this going? And I gave him some concrete examples of things happening in the community, people who have said things that are extremely hostile, or people who are jumping to conclusions about others in the community. I just see the potential for division. And that's nothing new in terms of human nature and history of this world. But in our community, I'm seeing it boiling over in ways I've not seen it for the past decade that I've lived in this community. I said, hey, look, so then going back on point to the whole system of governance thing, I understand people who look at Christians who would support President Trump and would lean more right, and they think, how could you do that? Look, this guy's a monster. He's a narcissist. He's a tyrant. And look what happened Wednesday. It's proof of that. I mean, what more do you need? How could you support? And I get that totally, and would agree on a bunch of levels. And maybe they see, okay, the trajectory of someone like that would be like the Third Reich, man, like Nazi Germany, Adolf Hitler, that type of nationalism, that type of imperialism. It's a huge danger. But then I'd say, hey, look, going the other direction when it comes to some of these topics that are deeply intertwined with a socialistic perspective, you look at communist Russia, communist China. I mean, the millions upon millions of bodies that have been stacked up. And that stuff comes from some belief system, and it comes from a certain understanding of human nature. And so I believe there's a place to talk about human nature and when it comes to the laws of this world, not kingdom, that's its own economy, as we said earlier. But hey, and I don't have it. There's no easy answer. I don't believe unbridled capitalism is the answer. But I fear, I guess, that now the cultural pendulum is swinging to where it's like, well, we're going to go to this system of governance, and even all these Christians flocking to it saying, this is what following Jesus looks like. We're going to do this, and we're going to usher in the utopia. And I say, well, historically, I was just learning about the French Revolution. I mean, if you dig into that goes really deadly places quickly. I mean, arguably both can. There's extremes both sides, but I don't know. So that was a lot.
I think you're touching on a lot of things. I think one thing I'd bring out from what you're saying is we are two kingdom people. I think there's a kingdom of heaven that we are in Christ and totally outside the law. And then we're here in this civil arena of working out the law civilly. And I think it's right and true for us as people in this world, though not of it, to try and speak to what we think the law should be for everyone, and trying to apply it in a just way is not wrong. You've seen, I think, in society right now that there's division over what that means in our democracy, even. Or we're not really a democracy in our federalistic system, right. Republic,
democratic republic, or sure. Right, however it's.
But I think that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that, nor there's anything necessarily wrong with losing that fight if the voices are heard. The difficulty is that I definitely have a feel for what I think is right and wrong, and then I think theologically I bring in this idea of a low anthropology, not a high one. Mm-hmm. The difficulty we have, I think, right now is that the people have a pretty high anthropology. They think that
right,
with a little right instruction, and if we just got the right information out there, people would choose the right thing.
Right.
And I think anthropology should be really low.
Yeah, I agree.
I mean, that's to me why capitalism works okay, is because it assumes a fairly low anthropology.
Exactly.
Like it says, stay away from judging people that they're going to do things right, motivate them with money.
Right.
That's pretty low motivation.
Right.
So you're not appealing to their sense of justice, you're appealing to their sense of preservation.
Right.
But that being said, I feel like that low anthropology carries into even my expectations for government. So I don't expect a lot. It's scary when I see that there's a movement of people away from what I think the truth is and buying into things that have a higher anthropology. And to me, communism, especially at its base, has a pretty high anthropology.
It does.
Like, there's this ideal good peasant or I mean, the general person is a good person, and we just got to take the resources away from these greedy people.
Right.
It doesn't work because the power switches over to the government, and that becomes your means of control. But that's not really our talk today. I feel like, though, there's no gospel in any of it. It's all about law.
Yeah, I agree. I agree 100%. And I want to be a voice of truth and grace to people on both sides. And yeah, it's the greatest calling there is, to be able to share with people the good news of who our Creator is. But part of that, inescapably, part of that is talking to people who are wrangling and wrestling and fearful and struggling. And so that's where we are, and it's where we find ourselves in terms of ministry with others.
But could we go towards, because what I'm trying to get our people to do is, instead of like fighting over the law, is to find unity. Like how do you actually have common ground with someone on the other side?
Right.
And how do you do that in such a way, because it takes away fear, even someone who thinks very differently than you. Right. And the way that I think we're supposed to do it is to see that we're all in the same boat of low anthropology. We're all sinners. We're all like, we all don't see things quite right.
Right.
I mean, that White Fragility book you mentioned, I've read 2 of them. I think both of the ones you mentioned.
Yeah.
I disagree strongly with their premise.
Mm-hmm.
I disagree a lot with what they're saying. But man, they're trying to get towards something that maybe I have a blind spot in. And can I have a heart to say I want to listen and hear, or not? And the only reason I really go there is because I know I'm a sinner. I know the law condemns me, doesn't affirm me. It's not like I've got the pillar of truth and they've got the pillar of error. Right. If I could just talk to them enough, then they'd come to my pillar of truth. Right. It's something that both of us are going to have to see, that we're saved by the blood of Jesus. So eventually I want the opportunity to tell them the only thing that matters is forgiveness. Right. But how does that play out in a real world, right? I mean,
all right. And still there needs to be law and a system of governance. But yeah, that's true. And I agree with you 100% on trying to find common ground. And I think when you dig down into each person and the layers of and complexity of who we are, deep down there are desires. And while we end up in very different places, fundamentally, we're not all that different. I mean, people want peace and security, and we all have these values and desires and expectations and fears that go along with the things that we value and expect and desire. And so, yeah, we're not different on that deep level. But then we have a very significant difference in terms of how we think we can get to that place. And going back to the spiritual kingdom side of things, we just say, look, that this is why we need the gospel, and we need God's grace, and God's truth is not presenting to us some kind of ladder to climb to get to God. It is all about God meeting us right where we are in our funk of our human nature. He meets us right where we are, and offers us grace and mercy, and has, by grace we are saved, not of works. But then we go back to, okay, and we're living in this world, and it has laws, it has scientific laws, and we need laws, civil laws in society, and what's most helpful. And I
see those really differently. I hope you do too.
Oh, I totally do.
Scientific laws, it's almost a misnomer for what we're talking about to lump them. I mean, the civil laws we're under in our society are mostly made by man.
Right.
They may or may not be true. I mean, you need to drive 40 miles an hour in this stretch of
right.
Street is not a scientific law that you can't break. I mean.
Oh yeah, no. I'm just saying I see those you mean the laws of science, the laws of nature versus civil law. Oh yeah, I see them very differently. I'm just saying
we're talking about civil law. We're not talking about the laws of nature. I mean,
well, yes. The only thing I would say along with that, the way that I guess the reason I'm joining them, is kind of goes back to the whole issue of which system of government, with human nature being what it is, what tends to happen, for example, if we take away some of the, like this whole defund the police, and if we take away consequences from people, or if when it comes to economics, if we don't have incentives for people to work, then it says in Second Thessalonians, right, where it talks about if a man's not willing to work, then he shouldn't eat. You know, we need to. This is coming out really poorly. I have to think through how to communicate this more clearly, but I guess it kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier. Like even historically, you look how do things tend to play out with what human nature is like, and it's not as cut and dry as the law of gravity. But I mean, there's a reason in the Old Testament, the Ten Commandments of the law was given with an understanding of what humans are like, and there were stiff consequences that were necessary. I mean, is the reform framework of the curb, right, where the flesh needs to be restrained or look out, right? So I'm just saying the way things can go, the momentum of human nature left unchecked with the law system, it's disastrous. Just like jumping off a building is disastrous.
Yeah, I guess,
Does that comparison make sense?
I'm losing you a little bit in the comparison, but that's okay. I think I understand what you're saying, and I think the reality to me is that where I'm trying to get my people to live is that to realize that the law of God always accuses you. So the when we get so riled up about the people breaking the moral law, if you will, and cheating, or breaking the law and stealing, they're stealing an election, or breaking the law and they're greedy and they're coveting and they want things they shouldn't have. That those things all also accuse me. Like I'm the hypocrite, and you see it. It's actually really interesting to look at the accusations of each political side that we're in right now,
Right.
and to think they could be talking about themselves.
Yeah, right. It's the same.
I mean, it's like,
I know.
whoa, it's like you even realize that you could be looking at a mirror.
Yep.
So, and to realize we're all in that, because the tendency is for me to say, yeah, those guys are like that and those guys are like that, but I'm seeing things rightly. And usually for a Christian, I pull out my Bible and it's, through the scriptures I'm looking. And we don't realize that that there are Christians who are Democrats and Christians who are Republicans and Christians who are socialists and Christians who are capital, whatever, however you want to break it down in terms of that. And the difficulty is my accusation, and not realizing, not that I'm not right in the accusation, because oftentimes I am. It's just the other four fingers I'm ignoring as they.
Yeah, right.
So therefore I have this arrogance or this pride that comes into, instead of a brokenheartedness and a desire for reconciliation, I'm getting, and these folks who are pointing out past racial divide or real errors in our society, they're right, they're not wrong, but the way that they're doing it then is hypocritical even towards their point. So, and I'm saying that because I'm doing the same thing, because I live in this world and the law accuses me.
Right.
So the only answer is forgiveness in the gospel.
Right.
And to bring that into our civil discourse as a Christian means that I want to see the law as accusing, not I want to see the law as building up a good society. And that's a really different viewpoint, because I feel like a non-Christian, and America's not Christian.
Right.
America as a society is using the law to build up the society, not using the law to accuse and humble everyone so that they get Jesus.
Right.
So we have a very different viewpoint on what life is. And we got to fight, and the fight that we're in is to help people stay around the cross and not to start worshiping the law, because to me, to worship the law is to try and use the law to establish the best society known to build Babel. Right.
Yeah, Tower of Babel. Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah, I agree. And I have difficulty for many years. Man, I had prided myself in being like a libertarian, and I really did not spend a lot of time or mental energy on these topics, and just have more recently, especially in 2020. And keeping those distinct and having the gospel kingdom focus, which is exactly what everybody needs, regardless of where they stand on these different issues, is one thing, the most important thing. There is a place for political engagement and studying history and seeking to understand these things, and trying to do my part to contribute to the community in some way. But I understand that can be enticing and can appeal to the sense of personal sovereignty or control in
Yeah.
ways that are harmful and induce anxiety and so on and so forth.
Well, and I hope that where we go is that we realize. So I'm putting two fingers in front of me, and there's two choices I can make about what direction to take, whether I should engage over here or whether I should engage over here. And what I mean by that is whether I should go and form a political action committee, or whether I should stay home and be with my family and just focus on loving them. And you say, well, which choice should I take right now? Because this is really important, and I need to do what the Lord wants me to do. And what I tell people is, and what I think is important for our folks who listen, is that we're at a place of personal humility. Like, we're like Jesus in Philippians 2, and then in Philippians 3, saying, I have no righteousness of my own. And I'm so little, I don't understand what God's doing. God's hidden mostly, and not in scriptures and the revelation of Jesus, but in terms of who should win the next election.
Yeah, his plans for the world.
Yeah. So I think that even in these little plans, the trust that I have to have, and what I'm trying to people to trust, is to trust that Jesus will use you with the desires that you have right now. So, like, I have no desire to go on a political march, but say you do. That I'm going to trust that God's going to use both of us. Christ is producing fruit in us in both of those arenas. And whether I stay at home and I'm with my kids and I'm like loving on them, or whether I'm out marching because I feel strongly and I've been given that desire by God. God gives our desires. He creates what he wants. That I trust that there's fruit in all of it, and that my God, who's big, and Jesus, who is in control of it all, is actually working out what he wants. So to me, this is what faith is. It's like, it's instead of self-rule, I got Jesus rule. So Jesus rule means trusting him that he's actually doing and creating in me the things that I want. That's not inactivity. That's an unwillingness to judge people's actions as godly or not. Christian, right?
Right. Yeah. Good. And I will echo that and say that like last Sunday, for the first time in my life, I preached a message from the book of Habakkuk. And it was,
the fig tree doesn't blossom, that one, the end, or did you do something earlier?
I did. I actually started at the tail end, and then I kind of went back and worked back to the conclusion he comes to at the end. And, I went to the beginning and worked to the conclusion he comes to in the end. And there's one section in there and one particular verse that says, I'm going to butcher it, but basically the idea is God dwells in his holy place, and let all the earth be silent.
Isn't that cool?
And that was before what happened Wednesday. And already, things have already been hugely charged. But I'm just saying, think of how comforting that is. Like, it's okay to just shut your mouth. It's okay to just be quiet. Like, God invites us, just be quiet. I know what I'm doing. I know I'm omniscient. I see through this clearly. I have good plans for everything that happens, even the horrible things that happen. I don't make them happen, but I let them happen. And I have a good plan for how they happen. And I have this world in my good, gracious, sovereign hands, and I have you in my good, gracious, sovereign hand. And so it was really comforting to me and to our congregation to talk through that.
That's cool.
So yeah, it was really good. I guess, so what do you say if you had to, we'll make this about other people because it's more comfortable that way. But as a point of just, again, thinking out loud. But what do you say to the Christian who comes and says, hey, I'm on the right and I feel the election was stolen, and how, okay, Dax and Jeff, I hear you guys on this good God and sovereignty and all that. I hear you on that, and on the hidden will of God. I hear you on that. But there is a responsibility, and doesn't following Jesus look like protesting abortion and how that's happening, and these other areas that are grievous, again, economically? Let's say, okay, this is just a new way of giving handouts, and we're not enforcing 2 Thessalonians. What about the need to do that? Let's start with them. What do you say to that person who is distraught right now? Trump has lost the election. Biden is now the president-elect. and their world is falling apart, and saying, hey, I thought following Jesus looked like this in terms of my day-to-day actions. What do I do with that?
Yeah, I think there's an essential humility right away of following Jesus may not look like what you think. I mean, right? But to get more specific with that person, I think that what there's a lot of ways in our free society right now that we can express our opinion about what's happening. We ought to, in our society, everybody, we ought to stand for justice. And you think that injustice has happened, certainly you can, and I think very legally, and I think has been legal and has done a lot of neat things to say, wait, we think this is wrong, and we need to explore it in the system that we have. Mm-hmm. I think that for the Christian, we certainly are supposed to stand and speak the truth, and the best way we can. I think what has happened is that and we have to have a rule of law in society. That's like really clear in 1 Timothy. It's the civil use of the law. It's to handle people that are going out of bounds. And so we have a rule of law. So violence and public violence is generally seen as against the law, right? It's not done in the service of enforcement. So it ought to be that that's always the rule of law. The difficulty that we have right now, to me, is that people on the right who just recently had this protest in the Capitol and and then a small subset of people, not the rally, not the speaking, not the freedom of speech that we all have, but then the violence that followed for a small subset of people ought to be condemned by everybody. Yep. Right. The difficulty is that we've had months, if not a year, of similar violence from the other political perspective. It's seemingly condoned. Right. So what people start to do is they start to say, well, it's not evenly handed, then I forget it. But we got to fight that, to me. Yeah, right. We have to be a people who stand for the rule of law because that's what it is, and stand for justice. So and those things. The society, what we've started to go into now is to try and evaluate motive. Yeah. So really what happens is they say, well, my violence is okay because it was motivated by this great injustice. Yeah. And your violence is not okay because it's not motivated. So both sides starting to evaluate not the rule of law, like the behavior, which is the only thing we can really control. Right. But the motive level. Desire. So we got to get away from that. It can't be about the desire. It's got to be what the behavior is. And these behaviors in society we can't do. I can't control your internal desires, but I can enforce external behavior. It's the opposite of the gospel, right? But because the gospel is all about the heart. This is not about the heart. This is about behavior. So I think that we need to stand on those things. And what I'm telling people who are particularly grieved by some of these things is take a step away from the media. And it's a whole nother topic. It's another thing. And you probably want to still comment on the other. But to me, the media is whichever media you're listening to is driving one viewpoint right now. And either viewpoint. And unfortunately, the more you listen to just one viewpoint, the more upset you are at the motive of the other side. Right. And so if you can get away from that and just step aside and say, okay, I want justice and I'm going to do whatever legally I can to get justice. Yeah. And that's, to me, that's fantastic. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, well, that's good. And let me touch on the last thing you said, and I'll go back to the previous. I mean, for me personally, I have at times taken a break from the media, different podcasts I listen to, social media, but I end up going back to it. And in some ways that's by necessity. But I definitely agree that there's a healthiness to breaking away from it, because it's inflammatory, and it does appeal to those fleshly desires to sit as judge, which includes judging people, not just the action, but their motives, and then the contempt that comes along with that. And it's ironic. I mean, it's humbling and ironic that, I mean, as a preacher of the gospel, I'm always talking about grace, and I can start to pride myself in having a grace perspective and seeing clearly human nature and all. But then I find myself, I hear what comes out of my mouth, or the tone with which it comes out of my mouth. And here I am again on my high horse, right? Condemning the other side. So I agree with you on that. And going back to those folks, this is part of, maybe we'll just touch on this. And it really, again, it goes both ways. and I'll illustrate it this way. I read recently about the Salem witch trials, and I kind of went back to that, and I don't even remember why, but I just went, and it was just internet research. I didn't buy any books or anything, but I was just reading about it, and I came upon this topic of spectral evidence. I don't know if you remember the story well or these details of the story, but at that time, something called spectral evidence was admissible in court. And what it was people who had claimed to have a vision or a dream about a certain person who they believed was a witch. They could present that in court as evidence, and it was accepted. And many people were executed. And that is one of
the colonies, right? Isn't it Salem?
Yes, right. Yep. This is one of the many blemishes on the history of America. And one of the driving factors in that was everybody was reinforced in you can't escape this, but it's just an egregious example of reinforcing the human tendency to judge the motives of another person, or to trust my perception of someone means that what if I perceive that about someone, that's true of them. So take it to today, right? And talking with my friend who's part of the leadership of this equity advisory committee with this racism question. I mean, now we're told, look, if a student believes they have been victimized by racism, then affirm that belief. Don't ever question that. And I understand, because I am fully aware the greatest blemish on our history as Americans is racism. It's atrocious. And we all condemn that. Just like you said earlier, we couldn't more passionately condemn something than we condemn that.
Yeah.
At the same time, now in our modern era, in this day and age, in our communities, it seems like this issue of we have a modern version of spectral evidence. It's like, hey, if you think that that's true, if you think someone was viewing you that way and they have racial animus toward you, then it's true. And even part of, as I understand, I don't want to over spiritualize this, but going back, I guess, to the gospel, hey, I'm my biggest problem. God sees, it's not my job. I can't see the motives of other people. God sees through me. I have my own mixed motives, and God's been gracious toward me. And that doesn't mean we just give a free pass to everyone and just treat people however you want. I mean, we still need to try to govern how we treat each other. But if we are reinforcing and spreading this mentality of, okay, hey, go out there and now just witch hunt everybody, it doesn't play out well.
Well, I just think that what you're getting at, and I want to take it from the opposite direction, because I feel like what happened. No, I like what you're saying.
Yeah,
it's really good. I agree. The perception being, but I think it's coming out of our societies and peoples, not Christian, but influenced by Christianity, that we have this sense that behavior is not enough. There's a problem with the heart. We need people to have the right heart, and so we want the law and we want the rules to reflect the heart, not just behavior. So like the Bible's laws, which get a little bit towards heart, don't covet, right? Is very much a heart thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I can't prevent you from coveting. I just call out what I think is coveting in you, right? Mm-hmm. And so because society wants so much to see people as good, we want good people, not bad people. So people are good or bad. Yeah. And so good people, usually those are people who think like me,
right?
And bad people who disagree with me or have different choices, right? That I'm judging their heart, right? And so then I even get into, they may act good, but they're not good. They're faking. So I judge their behaviors even through a lens of suspicion, because what I really want are people who have the same heart of goodness. I think this is because we realize that the law's not good enough. And instead of the law being sufficient, like if you hold to something, I'm going to assume that you're doing it. And that's good enough for society, because there's no way to get deeper. Yeah. We want to get deeper, and we want to affirm people's essential goodness. So that's this chasing after, justice to some degree. And to me, this is the basis for why a lot of people totally irrationally hate our past president or the president now that's about to go out. It's almost a derangement piece, because everything he says, they're putting it through a filter of his heart is bad. Right. And so I guess my appeal to people in our society is, no, we live law based on the action, not on the heart, because we can't get to the heart. The only thing that gets to the heart is the gospel. The only thing that changes my heart is the good news of Jesus, and society doesn't have it.
Right.
And by the law, I can't get there, but I'm trying to use the law to get to the heart and try and reveal who's good when the law always revealed just the badness.
Right. And that's where, too, it's interesting because I agree with you 100% that society does not have the gospel by and large. And that's by God's grace, our privilege as we're able is to present that message to anyone who has ears to hear, anyone who can be both convicted by the law of God and who has a desire for God's mercy and forgiveness, and who can cherish the mercy and forgiveness of God through Christ.
But society is going after love. I mean,
absolutely, but what kind? But like a manufactured kind of.
Well, they want
manufactured kind of counterfeit love, and it's very. It's and not just society at large, but this is where I'm struggling too. Is like I see Christians chasing after that. Like, for example, and again, this goes both ways, but I'll just give an example from now on the left. And a friend of mine I was talking with, he was giving me an example of how this, with this racial topic, he was traveling with his family, and there were homeless people. They had to turn off the road for a little while, something to do with bad traffic or whatever. And where they ended up, there's just homeless people everywhere, and he can't get his family with him. He's feeling kind of protective. Quickly reaches over, locks the doors. I think one or two of the homeless people happen to be African American, and then as that was happening, he's like processing it of like, oh wow, look what I just did because of my racial bias, right? So he's profiling, exactly. So, and I think that's the term used. And then he just sort of put it in the context of, hey, in my Christian walk, and even use the word, in my sanctification, this is part of how now I'm growing, is I'm aware of that racial bias and the profiling. And I see how I've got these blind spots as a white person, as a privileged person. And so I said, hey, look, man, I think that's great. Anytime we can be more aware of our own issues, and I mean, in the psychological realm, it's self-awareness, right? In our sphere, it's like, hey, it's biblical humility. It's just being clear on, hey, my heart is my biggest problem, and God is exposing the ugliness of what's there and ministering grace to that. So I said, I affirm that. I think it's great. I think that bears fruit. That's awesome. But he went just to that level of, okay, then kind of had a conversation with his family about it, and hey, this is not good, and we need to follow Jesus by being loving toward people, especially the downtrodden and those who have it less fortunate. And so I hear that, and again, great, like follow Jesus and let that be a catalyst for thinking through how you treat people around you. But if that's what, if that's a sum and substance of following Jesus, and if that's the means by which I continue to grow in my sanctification or become more sanctified, however a person would put it, part of me wants to say, well, then why don't you just, invite them back to your house? You have a big house. How far do we go with this? What do you say to that person who says, well, I hear what you guys are saying about God's sovereignty and his plan, and it's hidden and all that, and we have the simplicity of the little sphere we have in our lives of influence, but boy, we have a responsibility, and following Jesus means being for the downtrodden. And so I go, there's more I could say, but that's an example of, okay, now following Jesus in that direction. What do you say to that?
What do you think? What did you say to him?
I honestly, I did not in any way challenge. I just affirmed. I'm trying to remember. I don't think I challenged. I think I just affirmed, look, I think anytime we can be more sensitive to our own biases and our own ways of mistreating people, being prejudiced, I think that's great. It's a humbling thing. It's a great thing. We didn't have a lot of time. So it didn't have a lot of time, and it wasn't in the context of like where we had time to go into a theological discussion. But if I had that opportunity, I would want to go there with even how we understand, as we've talked about 100 times, sanctification. Is this?
Yeah, so, I think a couple of things. Okay, one is what we talked about before, which is the gospel gets to your heart and the law doesn't. Mm-hmm. The law condemns you. Mm-hmm. So the difficulty we have, to me, in a situation like this is clarity around the gospel, because society is all over this, and there's no Jesus in any of it. Right now, our society, our non-Christian society that has no idea or no heart to submit themselves to Christ, says you need to love your neighbor. says the profiling you're doing is wrong, says that what you need to do is love, and loving is not having these biases, and we need not to have them. And we want justice, and that means treating people equally and fairly. And we all affirm those things. It's not that we don't affirm them. It's that there's no absolution in the society. There's just self-improvement. So you hear the thing that you're wrong in, you evaluate whether it's true, and then you correct it so you get better.
It's like self-atoning in a way.
It's self-righteousness. Yes, bootstrap stuff, no question. And actually it doesn't work because it's never enough.
Yeah.
And that's what you were kind of referring to, I think, is that if you were just going to stop thinking poorly, why aren't you actually helping them? And if you're not helping them, how come you're not helping them more? And if you're not helping them, how come you're not helping them maximally?
Right.
And there's always somewhere where you could go more. And so what we do is we relativize and we say, well, I'm helping them more than those people over there.
Right.
There's some level at which we're good.
Right.
And we make a mark in the sand that we make. It's not from God.
Right.
It's just relative to other people. So it's a way of thinking. It's not wrong. There's nothing wrong civilly with saying what we really want to focus on in our society is racial equality, because we've missed the boat on it for a long time, and it's wrong. And let's get in there more than we have.
Yeah.
Cool. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. That's great.
Yeah.
There's just no Christianity in it at all to me.
Right.
The Christianity is where the guy does that, and his wife says, you're forgiven. You know that that Christ has you and forgives you and shed his blood for you, not so that you would go be kinder to people, but simply for you to rest and know he's got you. Not only does he have you, he has those people outside.
That's right. He loves them more than you do.
He's got your kids that are going to have to live 30 years from now. He's got that our trust is that Jesus, actually this message of you're adored even though you're disgusting. Right. And really the disgusting one isn't the guy outside the car. The disgusting one is you.
All right.
And so that's so good for us. We need that message, is that, wow, you know what? We're okay because of Christ, not because of our goodness.
Right.
But the society is pushing hard in the opposite direction, and we got to help our people not buy it.
Yeah, that's my heart, man. Beginning with me, and not buy into that, whichever direction that might go, but also in helping other people to see through that. And I agree entirely.
But the Christian church doesn't even. I mean, so many Christian.
Oh man. I mean, you're watching this happen in real time, right?
Yeah. It's like they want you to toe the line, and then they'll pass judgment on your heart that you're okay if you toe a line, and not will you receive forgiveness, but will you improve?
Right.
So I guess that message is just so enticing, but it's a self-righteousness message, and it's infected our society, and it has the veneer of going along with Christianity, and so it feels like our society is being Christian, but actually it's demonic. There's no freedom in it. Like John 8 just says, hey, if you know the truth will set you free.
Yeah.
But the truth Jesus is talking about, he's the bread of life. Yeah. He's the light of life. He's the water of life. I mean, it's just all him.
Right. And that's what we have to offer people, is him, not ourselves, but him. And not our even, in one sense, like when was it Luther that said, God doesn't need your good works, but your neighbor does. I mean, there's a place for the fruit of that is born out in relationships and in how we treat people. And we both of us would say, and I've heard you say it in sermons, and I say it all the time, look, think carefully about how you treat people. Love your neighbor as yourself. Like, yes, think on that and endeavor to do that. And as you do, remember, you will always fall short. You will always have mixed motives. You will always struggle. And God is good, and God's love is a reality. And he has shed forth his love in our hearts and through our heart. He is bearing fruit and doing good things in and through us, despite us. And it's not about us pulling ourselves up by the bootstraps and saying, okay, I'm going to now come up with what the formula is for following Jesus, and I'm going to go do that as best I can. And to your point, then we relativize it and we say, well, maybe I'm not perfect, and I didn't do as much for that person as I could have, but I did a whole lot more than those people over there did. And that itself is toxic to us personally within our own hearts and minds. And then of course
it's my sympathy with maybe the other side of the aisle
Hmm.
I mean, I'm pretty apolitical,
Hmm.
but the people who more recently have brought up both the history but also the present systematic problems in our society with how we treat each other,
Yeah.
I think that's okay to bring up. It's not wrong to say, hey, look at this failure.
Hmm.
It's not wrong to say, hey, there's injustices all over,
Hmm.
because the law just isn't being evenly applied, right?
Hmm.
And then as you bring those things up, or you focus on this area or that area, you're not getting the whole scope of where we're failing. You're just touching on one area. But it's not wrong to say that's a bad area. The question to
Right.
me becomes, what do you do next, right? What's
Right.
the next step?
Right.
Because and now that you see that there's a problem, if the next step is let's get rid of the problem, and otherwise and that'll make you good, otherwise you're bad,
Yeah.
then you've gone against the gospel pretty strongly. There's no forgiveness.
As I've sat through these equity advisory committee meetings, I've been in on 4 or 5 of them, Dax,
Yeah.
and hearing the mantras as 2 facilitators, and they're part of this um, government funded or government grant funded organization that their whole mission is to spread the message of equity throughout, uh, by leading in this realm of education and corporations and all around the state. And so this is their calling. And they're driven by a sense of religious fervor. It's
Yeah.
obvious, and they have their mantras. And at one point, one of the facilitators said, "Look, we're doing the hard work here that needs to be done, and you're going to start to think sometimes, well, but we're not making enough progress, and there's so far to go." And he said, "But you just have to keep going. You have to keep working, and it's just work, 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 work. We've got to do better." And this person happened to be white, and he said, "We have to do everything we can, and even if we will never be able to even chip away much at this issue of white supremacy, we have to keep working toward this end." And the sense of burden of that was palpable as he shared that. And then you sit through all these um, presentations. I mean, it's looking at the past and the atrocities of the past and saying, how are we going to rectify the situation today? And it's never ending, and it's burdensome, and it is a self-atoning thing. And then there's no nuance in it. I mean,
Right.
for example, statistics, I've got screenshots of statistics that they put up in their slides, and it's, here's how African Americans are more likely to be killed by police officers than white people, 3 times more likely. And then I hear people in the breakout sessions we have, including an African American father who was just appalled by it. It was almost like it was the first time he'd heard it, but he was appalled by it. Said, well, to think that my son is going to be targeted in our community, and literally, I quote, just because of the color of his skin. And I thought, okay, maybe there's a chance of that, but just because of the color of his skin, and how likely is he to be targeted in our community, which is a pretty quiet community? How likely is he to be targeted just because of the color of his skin, when you've just seen an inflammatory statistic that was couched in a certain context without a context, and where people then run with that sort of thing? And I'm reading Thomas Sowell, and as a contrary example, he gives an example on the New Jersey Turnpike. They set up a camera system, these special high-speed cameras, and they were tracking speeding violators, people violating the speed limit on the freeways on the Jersey Turnpike. And by the end of it, they concluded that I think it was like 3 times more likely to be an African American going over the speed limit than a white person. And it was even related to like how much over the limit they were going. In the highest level, there was more African Americans than white people. Okay, and so we'll conclude, okay, but here's the statistics, here's the data that came as a result of the study that was done, and it was done by information gained by cameras and computers, had no people involved. So would you see the conclusion and say, well, see, that's evidence of systemic racism? They were cameras. They weren't human beings pulling people over. So yes, there's such thing as a culture that is created and a mindset that people have that can have racial overtones or undertones or what, but it's like we just humans, and I shouldn't be surprised, as we've been saying, look, we know human nature is what it is, but we're not we don't do nuance and moderation and careful conversation and peaceful conversation well, naturally speaking. We just don't do that well. We're tribal and we jump on a side. And
Well, I think the interesting thing to me about what you're saying is that it is an open question, because you're pushing back a little bit of what I said, which I like, is it's an open question of how much problem is going on and what the truth actually is. As we try and make solutions for kind of how our society is set up and how just we can be and questions of justice within society, it's an open question, which is what are the issues, and
right.
to somewhat it's open to your interpretive speculation
Absolutely.
on those things, and where the truth is, I might be wrong, or you might be wrong, or the person in the seminar might be wrong, and
Right.
I think that's a robust discussion to have. And I guess what I'm after is that it is right to want a just society and to want fair application of law. We should try and aim those laws as best we can on externals, measurables, and not on heart, because there's no way to measure heart in our society that way.
Right.
And then we should have a really low anthropology. And the thing is, society is almost flipping it to me, and it's going to be a problem for the coming years, is we're trying to get after motive, and we're trying to come from the assumption that we can make people good. Yeah. And so because of those anti-Christian thoughts, I think we're going to have to be wise in our churches to hold fast to the gospel and give people assurance that Jesus has them, and he's working in a non-Christian society rather than here's a Christian society that's getting better. So,
right. Yeah, right. Yeah. Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I agree, man. And at the end of the day, yeah, it's God who sees all things as they are, God of truth. He knows, we don't. We're stumbling around here, and we need to try to do better. And as a society, we need to try to do better, and we need to vote and educate ourselves and all that. And this world is we know which direction it's going, and only when God shows up in the perfect person of Jesus and touches down again will there be a perfect kingdom and a perfect society. And we wait for that day, wait for the final redemption and restoration of all things, and we live day by day with our provisions for the day. And so I'm grateful for friends like you and conversations like this, and the church that I have, where every week, man, that's my highlight, is going to church and just being freed in my mind from the cares of the world, and just drawn up in this amazing truth of who our God is and how big he is and how gracious he is.
Amen.
Why don't we close in prayer here, man? Thanks for the time today.
Awesome.
All right, let's pray. God, thank you for this time that Dax and I are able to talk together and think out loud and process what's happening outside of us, what's happening inside of us, and what's happening with people that we are in relationship with. Thank you, God, for your love for us, and thank you for the good news of the gospel, who Christ is and what he's done for us, and that he is the source of hope, and he's promised us eternal life in him. Thank you so much for that. And we lose sight of it, and you have mercy for us in that, and you continually invite us back to rest in the gospel and the truth of what you've done for us through Christ, and to rest in the provisions of that, and the provisions for today that we have, and to trust that you'll provide for us in the future and for our families as well in the future. So we give you praise and thanks in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
All right, brother. Good talking with you.
Thanks, friend.
As usual. Thank you. And I will catch up with you again soon. Okay.
Awesome.
Talk to you, man. See ya. Bye.